G'day. In this video, we'll preview the Scourge of Ghyran rules for the Maggotkin of Nurgle. Scourge of Ghyran is offering each faction a set of seasonal rules that will be match play legal for the upcoming season, General's Handbook 25-26. The Grandfather has blessed the Maggotkin of Nurgle with 3 new heroic traits, the introduction of a faction prayer law, as well as an alternative Warscroll for Rodigus. Now, this unit does have a separate pitch battle profile. You can use the Scourge of Ghyran version or the original version. You obviously can't have 2 Rodigus in a list. It can be used in an army of renown, but just not a regiment of renown. So let's grow some rules in the Garden of Nurgle. Maggotkin of Nurgle have gained 3 new heroic traits, which are in addition to the existing 3 options like Overpowering Stench. Living Plague can be used once per battle in any combat phase. If this unit charged this turn, pick an enemy unit in combat with this target. The target has the disease keyword. This is an interesting way to inflict disease in the combat phase after the unit has charged. Normally, Maggotkin rely on the infect component of the Blessed by the Plague Father faction ability to start spreading disease onto an enemy army. But this method allows the Nurgle player to infect disease on an enemy unit before that step. Then at the end of the turn, they can use the more powerful spread component to inflict disease on multiple units at once. This is a great way to fast-track your disease blessings. Additionally, the earlier application of disease being applied before the end of the turn phase abilities can counter any armies that have healing abilities that are resolved at the end of the turn. This is especially useful in the opponent's turn if they have any ways to heal that disease before it starts to spread. This would then at least give you another opportunity to infect them again after your opponent has resolved all those end-of-turn abilities. Since this ability relies on charging, it's best used with a Lord of Affliction or a hero that can position themselves for a counter charge or a charge without being tagged first. Good positioning is going to be key to make the most of this battle tactic, given that you need to charge. Unctuous Preacher is a passive ability that will either turn a non-priest into a priest or provide a +1 to the chanting rolls if that unit is already a priest. The only way to access the new Nurgle prayer law is either taking the Harbinger of Decay who is already a priest or through this heroic trait that makes a non-priest into a priest. The Harbinger of Decay is the only one who can access the +1 to chanting rolls as an existing priest. This provides incredible utility with 3 distinct prayers that are all low chant value. We'll talk about that more in a minute, but the prayers will offer more reliable support with very easy chanting, or you can use the Warscroll prayer, completely up to you, giving you even more utility, tapping into things like magical intervention. Again, we'll get to the prayers in a moment with proper context. But generally speaking, if I think about either giving a +1 to the prayers of the Harbinger or giving a non-priest the priest abilities, I think it is more valuable to have an extra priest on the table than getting the +1. So if your list already includes 1 generic priest other than the Harbinger, I think this is a great heroic trait to be adding. If you're not taking any other priest and you have a bunch of named heroes and the Harbinger of Decay is the only priest that could be accessing this, then obviously a +1 is going to be great. You could be navigating the negatives from magical intervention. You could be tapping into the boosted versions of your prayers a lot easier. And the Harbinger's own Warscroll, if I remember correctly, is chanting on a 3. So again, a lot of great utility, and just obviously wait till you see the prayer law before you make the decision on this particular one. Corpulent Avalanche is the last heroic trait that can be used in any charge phase. If this unit charged this turn, pick a visible enemy unit within 1 inch of it to be the target, and roll a number of dice equal to this unit's movement characteristic. For every 3+, inflict 1 mortal damage on the target. And if any damage points were allocated to the target by this ability, this unit can move 2d3 inches. It can move through combat ranges of any enemy units, but it must end that move in combat with the units that it was already in combat with at the start of the move. So it's relatively self-explanatory ability that wants your hero to be charging. It's going to benefit a hero that has a high movement characteristic, like the Lord of Affliction, maybe the Great Unclean One, maybe the Harbinger of Decay, maybe. Nurgle units aren't known for their speed, so you're quite limited on the heroes. If you want to make the most of this, obviously you can put it on any hero, but if you put it on a base move of 4, you're only getting 4 dice. You clearly want to go to something like the Lord of Affliction, who has that much higher move, double probably. It is going to play well, as I mentioned, to the Lord of Affliction, because not only does it have a high movement, it also does have, it wants to charge. It wants to charge because it will have mortal damage on the charge. It's a unit that likes to lock up its enemy units and just grind it out and pin them in. And with that move of 8 inches, it shouldn't be too hard for you to deal at least 1 mortal damage on the target, and then allowing it to move an extra 2d3 inches, which if you're supporting like a Puskor Blightlord's unit, you would definitely be able to get more models into combat, depending on situation. But obviously, by moving 2d3, you could then kind of move around, manipulate the board state, and allow more or tag more parts of the board, whatever is up to you. But movement wins games, and all 3 of these are quite solid. Obviously, the once per game ability I like less, but it'll definitely kickstart your disease a little earlier. So not bad at all. Nurgle has also gained the Benedictions of Sickness Prayer Law. This is your first and only prayer law which can be accessed right now through the Harbinger of Decay. That is a native priest, or through the heroic trait that we just talked about, the preacher one. And that'll turn a generic hero into a priest. So you got 1 or 2 options here. And while we are talking about the Harbinger of Decay for a second, I do think that this prayer law is going to completely transform what this Warscroll does, making it a viable competitive choice, because when you look at the current Warscroll prayer of the Harbinger without the prayer law, it has a single prayer that can only be triggered, within 12 inches of an enemy. So half the time you're not even getting to use the priest abilities as it is. I think you can't even start banking up your points, if I remember correctly. But anyway, Harbinger of Decay, massive win here. If you do take the Harbinger or the trait, you do get access to 3 new prayers. They all have a low chanting value of 3, and they all have very achievable boosted versions of it, which will make it very possible to chant up the boosted value without even having to use magical intervention to bank up the prayer law, or what we just said earlier, you can get the +1 if you put the heroic trait on the Harbinger. So we've talked about the prayer law. Let's actually now talk about the prayers. The first prayer is your unlimited prayer, and that is Infectious Surge, that lets you pick a visible, friendly Maggotkin of Nurgle unit wholly within 12 inches of them to be the target, and if successful, add 2 to the target's movement characteristic for the rest of the turn. In addition, if the chanting roll was 6+, for the rest of the turn, the target can use charge abilities, even if they retreated in the same turn. This prayer is going to help you breach the gap from losing the Field Sergeant Honor Guard ability from the last General's Handbook, and can be used on any friendly Nurgle unit, including your Plague Drones or even your Glotkin. However, it is only targeting a single unit, which makes it a little less valuable on units that want to move up in a castle. The boosted version allows retreat and charge, which isn't that useful to the Plague Drones since they've already got that ability, but it will help slower units reposition around with the retreat and then charge to get some more bodies on the point, or use it for your Puskor Blightlords to benefit from their charge bonus on a turn that they normally wouldn't have. The retreat and charge component doesn't bypass, though, the D3 mortal damage that's suffered when you do make a retreat move. So just be mindful that if you're going to retreat a severely damaged hero or a unit fitting on like 1 health left, you do risk the chance of the model being slain. This ability will help Nurgle-style cavalry units like your flies match a movement characteristic that's equivalent to other cavalry in the game, which is sitting around that 10-inch move. When combined with the Gift of Febrile Frenzy, it can give monsters like the Glotkin a total of 9-inch move. Blowab is going to get to an 11. The Blight Kings or even your Plague Bearers would get to a whopping 7. Overall, a great little ability, and it is unlimited. Agonizing Vomit lets you pick a visible enemy unit within 18 inches of them to be the target, then roll 7 dice. For each 5+, inflict 1 mortal damage on the target, and if the chanting roll was 6+, you get to add 2 to that roll. So this ability has a long range, but without the boosted version, it is relatively a minor effect. You're rolling 7 dice, fishing for 5s, and that mathematically works out to be around 2 mortals per chant, which isn't bad if you're trying to chip away at a unit. But what you're really going for is the boosted version because it's a much stronger effect. You're fishing for 3s rather than fishing for 5s. So you should average around 5 mortals per cast. It is easier to destroy a small support hero without any other kind of damage sources, dealing 5. It could take a nice chunk out of an elite unit, slay a model or more, and it could be a worthwhile choice for magical intervention, given it's got a very generous range of 18 inches, and you've got a very good selection of units by having that range. Though it might be best if you are banking up your points. Again, yes, you can do 2 mortals on average, and that might get you out of combat if you're, locked down with like 1 or 2 idiots on a little bit of health left. But otherwise, I would be saving up for the boosted version every day of the week. The final prayer is Frothing Mucus that lets you pick a visible, friendly Maggotkin of Nurgle unit wholly within 12 inches to be the target. And then until the start of your next turn, the charge +1 weapon ability will have no effect on combat attacks that target the target. Now, if the chanting roll is a 6+, weapon abilities other than companion weapons will have no effect instead. Turning off charge +1 damage plays to the strengths of Nurgle as this resilient, grindy army who can take the punch, have a smile, and then dish out some disease. This will usually work best on units with a base damage of 1 because that literally halves the damage output from the affected weapons by no longer having +1 damage. Since this is a defensive bonus targeting to one of your own units, you can play around nicely on the battlefield, and you might even influence your opponent to charge somewhere else. But to that point, your opponent may actually just completely avoid the unit, which may not necessarily be a bad thing. It could get them to avoid a particular objective. It may delay scoring a battle tactic for an extra turn. Whatever it is, it may actually disrupt their game plan completely. This prayer is going to work best on a larger unit that can block a lot of space out on the board and force an enemy unit to either charge them if they want to contest that objective or that point, or go for a different target. It's an incredible choice to use with magical intervention, as it might already be obvious after the hero phase where your opponent might be targeting and focusing their attention on, which will obviously make it easier for you to decide which unit you want to put the Frothing Mucus on. The boosted version, which also turns off weapon abilities like anti-X or crit mortals, will also frustrate your opponent, as they all know how grindy and tough and resilient you can be. And often one of the ways that we get through those toughy, resilient units is using things like anti-infantry, crit mortals, crit auto wounds, whatever it might be. And you turning them off just makes that a little bit longer, a little bit harder, and plays into your disease a little better. This type of ability will shift things in your favor. And imagine this prayer on a reinforced unit of Blight Kings, for example, or a tough centerpiece model like the Glotkin. It makes it nearly impossible to shift that model or unit in particular matchups. It takes a lot of damage to be able to handle that type of thing. And being able to shut down either the +1 damage or any of those crit damage or auto wounds or whatever it might be. We rely on those types of things. So again, big positive here. This will be amazing, but also frustrating. Depends on what side of the fence you're on. Finally, Nurgle has received one new Warscroll. It's an alternative Warscroll, a Scourge of Ghyran version of Rotigus. This is an optional Warscroll, and you are not forced to use the Warscroll if you prefer the existing version of Rotigus. But to help you understand the differences, let me break it down for you and talk a little bit more about the Ghyran version. So the new version of Rotigus's control score has doubled. It's gone from control score 5 to control score 10, which is going to match not only the Glotkin in regards to having a strong presence on objectives, it will also outscore almost every monster, probably outside of Mega Gargants. The melee profile is unchanged, and so are the other baseline stats. This Glotkin has still retained the +1 to casting bonuses, which is going to keep him as a reliable caster to Nurgle, given that it is a double spellcaster in the turn. But really where the changes come in are in the other abilities. His rampage has changed from Mountain of Loathsome Flesh to Tentacular Grip. The previous rampage was a horde clearer with a failure point. Now, with the Tentacular Grip, once per turn in any combat phase, you pick an enemy unit in combat with this unit to be the target. Roll a dice, and if the roll exceeds the target save characteristic, it inflicts the amount of mortal damage on the target equal to the roll. It is much easier to use, but it is less reliable as you need to roll above the target save characteristic. So on a 3+ save target, you're looking for a 4-up, for example. He's received a new Warscroll spell in Virulent Downpour, which has a casting value of 7, and it will add 3 inches to the range of the unit's Befouled Rainfall ability for the rest of the battle. Now, this unit can be affected by this ability multiple times, and the effects are cumulative. Then, it also inflicts 1 mortal damage on each enemy unit within range of that ability. The spell acts as a persistent effect on Rotigus, with each successful cast increasing the range of his passive ability. And it also deals damage to units that is in that increasing range without the requirement of them being diseased first. So let me actually walk back for a second and explain a little about what the Befouled Rainfall is. It's a passive ability that subtracts 1 from save rolls for enemy units while they're within 6 inches of this unit. So just as we mentioned, casting the Virulent Downpour will increase the range by 3 inches each time it's cast. So successfully, if you cast this spell in your turn, and then you cast it with Magical Intervention, if you did that every turn, you would end up with an insane 36-inch bubble by the end of the battle. Yes, you're not going to get it immediately, but it just kind of shows off you're growing and growing this bubble. And Rotigus does have a large base size. It means that you can place him in the middle of the board behind your unit of Plague Bearers or Blight Kings, using that massive aura and that massive base to give this large range effect of having a -1 to save. And every time you cast this spell means that the enemy is going to be fighting over different points of the battlefield, and that aura just continues to grow, and they become at risk of being affected with the -1 to save. And as we know, -1 to save is amazing. It's a Ren condition, essentially. So it's a Ren multiplier for those ones. Ren 1 turns to Ren 2, 2 to 3, yada, yada, yada. But we also know that there are changes to all that attack and all that defense, and that may actually increase things even worse. All that attack will cause a -1 to the save. All that defense will happen only once. So if they're in combat with multiple units, then that second set of attacks, especially under the aura of the rainfall, could really swing things to your advantage. And it will definitely scale better with those higher quality, higher quantity attacks that you have access to. Things like your Putrid Blight Kings, for example. I think they probably benefit the most from the attacks and the aura. Probably next up after the Blight Kings might be your Plague Drones or something like your Puskol Blight Lords. And I say that because they've got a high volume of attacks as well. So again, super great. Don't forget that many of your monster heroes or combat heroes like Horgots or the Lord of Blight will also see a significant average output increase through this ability. Units like your Plague Bearers, which rely on crit mortals and they lack a lot of rend with their one attack each, will benefit. They'll benefit a little bit less, but they will definitely be more deadly with this ability on, especially if the Spoilpox Scrivener has triggered the +1 attack. And it will also help solve one of Nurgle's problems in regards to handling those high save targets. And it will make Rodigus an extremely high value target for any opponent. And given there's 22 wounds, a 5-up save, quite durable, and obviously going to put a target on his head. And when I think about Rodigus and what Rodigus is going to do on the battlefield, I think that you're going to change roles a little bit. In the past, he's been on the table being like that double caster, a support hero, possibly avoidable. People wouldn't put that much emphasis. They'd focus on other things, to now a really big damage amplifying terror unit on the board. He can slap in melee. He's got a decent melee output. The rampage is solid, naturally tough, and has some really good abilities. And because of the -1 to save aura, it will naturally, if Rodigus is just one-on-one, increase that damage profile significantly. You can expect more of those attacks to go through and more damage to go into your opponent, just naturally, purely from the chip mortal and then just having that essentially an extra point of rend. I think every Nurgle army is going to want to consider a Rodigus. You may even start your list with Rodigus. I think that's how good this is. Definitely, if I think how Scourge of Ghyran has transformed some of the Warscrolls so far, I would probably put this in the top 5. This and the Gargant Kraken Eater is definitely a massive transformation. There's been some good transformations, but I think Rodigus, what I'm seeing here, is definitely a great solid piece. And then when you combine it with something like Sloppity Bilepiper to give you the -1 to be hit, you apply Fleshy Abundance and getting the -1 to wound, Rodigus becomes a tough, deadly anchor point, a force multiplier. He'll be positioned centrally in the board, trying to affect as much of the board state as possible. You could be, again, using the early magical interventions to get that aura up ASAP. Or you could be putting it on the flank and dominating the board presence there and just continually repeating that particular spell every time you can. And then once you've got a good enough aura, you'll just absolutely dominate the board and you'll just reap the rewards in the late game. So the Garden of Nurgle has definitely grown some bountiful fruits for you to harvest. The new Rodigus Warscroll is fantastic. If you hadn't noticed the way I was talking about Rodigus just then, I absolutely love this model, and I can see a lot of Nurgle lists starting with this particular model. It's a strong spellcaster. The save aura debuff is, look, I think it's going to be too hard to walk away. It's a really good Warscroll. The new prayer law is delicious, and it will bring a new mechanic to the battlefield that you haven't had access to, and it will change the battlefield value of the Harbinger of Decay. And if you don't want to take a Harbinger of Decay, you don't have the points, you've always got this new heroic trait that will allow a generic hero to turn into a priest, but not to be overshadowed. I think still the other two heroic traits are solid. If you don't care about the prayer law and you're taking Rodigus and you've only got one magical intervention and you're going to spend it on Rodigus over a priest, you know, there's some really good options for you to choose from. And as I was just talking about with Rodigus, I think you have gained probably one of the top Scourge of Ghyran updates, easily in the top 5. This is a very good update. I'm genuinely impressed with this particular one. This and Daughter's probably maybe the top 2 glow-ups overall. But if you're like me and you like the theory craft and list build and talk about your new favorite unit that you haven't joined the bandwagon from, Rodigus, or you want to talk about your prayer lore and the Harboring of Decay, why not come over to the AOS Coach Discord server, where we have plenty of spaces to talk about all of the factions like Nurgle. The link is down below in the episode description. I hope you enjoy those tasty treats from Nurgle, and I look forward to seeing it all on the table and seeing what you guys do with it all. Thanks for hanging around until the end. I hope you enjoyed that video and you walked away with a few new ideas. Now, if you did, I would love it if you pressed like on the video, as well as left me a comment with your thoughts. The conversation will continue over on Discord, and the link is down below in the episode description. I also want to give a massive shout out to the AOS Coach patrons and YouTube members who are supporting the channel and the growth that you're seeing here. So cheers, you are all bloody legends. And until next time, don't roll a double 1 on a spellcast.